On the night of November 26, 2008, as residents of Mumbai went about their daily lives, oblivious to what was coming, 10 Pakistani men associated with the terror group Lashkar-e-Taiba landed on the shores of the city and launched the most heinous attack on India's financial capital. The group carried out 12 coordinated shooting and bombing attacks, targeting prime locations, which included a major railway station, hotels, the port area, a religious house, and even a hospital. The Pakistani terrorists came ashore in Kalaba in South Mumbai on inflatable speedboats. They then split into multiple groups and carried out terror attacks throughout the city, which lasted 4 days, beginning 26th of November till the 29th of November 2008, when the last of the terrorists was killed. By the end, at least 174 people were dead, including Indian and foreign civilians, security personnel including senior police officers and NSG commandos, and 9 terrorists. One terrorist, Ajmal Kasab, was captured alive through the astonishing bravery of police officer Tukaram Omble, who captured the AK-47 wielding terrorist with his bare hands. He lost his life, but police officer Omble's courage ensured that the terrorist was caught alive, and the interrogation of Ajmal Kasab ensured that details of the conspiracy would emerge. After initial denials, Pakistan did admit that Ajmal Kasab was their citizen. In 2018, Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif admitted the role of Pakistan in the terrorist attacks. The main handlers of the attacks remain alive in Pakistan to this day. This gruesome attack sent shockwaves throughout India and shook the entire world. The victims included citizens of over 17 countries. Among these were India, the UK, the United States, Israel, Germany, Australia, Canada, France, Italy, Netherlands, Japan, Jordan, Malaysia, Mauritius, Mexico, Singapore, and Thailand. But heinous as the terror attacks were, there were also astonishing acts of selfless bravery, not only from courageous security officials, but also from civilians, like hotel staff sacrificing their lives to save guests, to an Indian woman risking her life to save a young Israeli child, to railway officials embracing death to save innocent passengers at the Mumbai CST. The terrorists and Pakistan may make as many attempts as they can, but humanity will survive. Humanity will win. We will not bow down to terror.
Good morning from London, England, where we commemorate the 13th anniversary in this webinar entitled Terrorism, a Continuing Challenge, Remembering the Victims of Mumbai Terror Attack 26/11. I'm Borzen Wagma, your host and moderator, and I hold affiliations at the School of Oriental African Studies as South Asia Institute, Center for Pakistan Studies, and Center for Iranian Studies. We have a distinguished panel lined up today to discuss this in our deliberations for an hour, and they are as follows. Baroness Verma of Leicester, a Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, who held Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State portfolios for international development as well as energy and climate change, a former government whip and cabinet office spokesman on international development, equalities and women's issues. In the House of Lords, Lady Verma is a ministerial champion for tackling violence against women and girls overseas, as well as the UN Women's National Committee. Ruhi Khan is a London-based independent journalist who extensively reported on the 26/11 attacks as NDTV's principal crime and investigations correspondent. She is currently an Economic and Social Research Council Scholar at the London School of Economics and Political Science and editor of the LSE's media blog. Ruhi was a Jefferson Fellow at the East West Center Hawaii and a recipient of the Mary Morgan Hewitt Award for Women in Journalism. She had met Mumbai Police's anti-terror squad chief Hemant Karkare only a day before the attack. Danish Khan is a journalist and historian living in London, and Danish has written several reports on the 26/11 attacks and its aftermath for the Mumbai Mirror. He was, in fact, one of the first reporters to be at the Taj Mahal Hotel by the Apollo Bandar Pier and has eyewitnessed the events all night. He has covered the UK and Europe for Times Now television, and Danish is a recipient of the Martin Senior and Amarsi Foundation scholarships for his current doctorate at the University of Oxford, where he is also affiliated with his Global History of Capitalism project. He has taught history at both Oxford and Stanford. He has co-authored with Ruhi Khan, Escaped, True Stories of Indian Fugitives in London. And lastly, but by no means least, is Divya Salaskar, a human resource consultant by profession and a numerologist on personal incapacity. She holds master's degrees in HR from the universities of Westminster and Toronto and speaks French and Spanish. Divya's father, Inspector Vijay Salaskar, was head of the anti-extortion cell and encounter specialist of formidable standing in the Maharashtra State Police Force. He was shot dead in 26/11 terror attacks when proceeding to save patients as a group of Pakistani terrorists fired rounds at the Karman Old Bliss Charity Hospital. He was posthumously conferred the Ashoka Chakra for gallantry in the Republic Day Honours List, January 2009. In my opening remarks, I can but bring myself to just say this and echo the words of an FBI official, namely, Mumbai changed everything. And he meant absolutely everything from that fateful Tuesday, September morning in Manhattan to the events across London, Madrid, Bali, and other heinous attacks. And what happened in Bombay was we saw a state sponsored attack by deep state elements in tandem with the military of the Pakistani security forces, both retired and sitting, who had planned, conceived, and executed this in one go. It was the most outrageous attack, and as the New York Times noted, one of the most well documented attacks to date. Perhaps I would now like my discussants to come in, starting with Ruhi Khan for your opening observations, please. Over to you, Ruhi.
Thank you, Busi. Thank you to the High Commission and the Nehru Center for organizing this panel and having me here today. 26/11, what can I say? It was perhaps the most horrific, unprecedented terror attack where several lives were needlessly lost. People carrying out their everyday chores, you just saw that in the video, like simply going home at the end of a long day, or enjoying a meal at a local restaurant, or celebrating in a five-star hotel. These innocent, unsuspecting people were brutally gunned down. Police officers bravely faced unknown enemies to protect the public. Some tragically lost their lives. 166 people were dead. Some I knew, some I came to know as I met their families and friends later. Others I will always know as those whose lives were cut short by the brutality of hate. I was working with NDTV, covering crime and investigations, so I was following the investigations very, very closely. And I was on the ground reporting from several terror locations. Sometimes when the attacks were live, others when only the bullet holes and blood splashes remained. I did see the injured in the hospitals, the dead on cremation grounds, broken hearts and broken lives almost everywhere. I rarely speak about 26/11. It was a traumatic event for most people. We don't realize it when we are in it deep. But at some point later, the tragedy hits you, and it hits you hard. Later is also a time to introspect. So I'm really thankful to the High Commission of India and the UK and the Nehru Center for giving me this opportunity to pay homage to the fallen heroes of 26/11 and those that, despite all odds, still stand tall. And I also want to take this opportunity to pay my respects to one man in particular, someone I was fortunate to know in my capacity as a journalist, anti-terrorism squad chief Hemant Karkare. He was probably one of the best cops I had met during my time in Mumbai. He was, um, what can I say? He was so kind. He was hardworking. He was professional. He was meticulous in his investigations, and he was brave. He was very, very brave. The ATS chief led from the front, which is why he was there on the streets with his brave colleagues. Additional CP Ashok Kamte and Inspector Vijay Salaskar, all extremely courageous men in uniform. And let's not forget, it was a nameless, faceless foot soldier who laid down his life to capture one of the terrorists without whom it would have been difficult to prove that the terror plot originated in Pakistan. Assistant sub inspector, in fact, Tukaram Omble, he should never ever be forgotten. We must also remember that there were countless policemen, including Sadanand Date, Rajwardhan, Vishwas Nagare Patil, who risked their lives to keep Mumbai safe. And we must also remember that there were many, many brave souls who we discovered during 26/11. Remember little Moshe, the 2-year-old boy in the Jewish synagogue. The terrorists held his parents hostage and then killed them. Moshe's nanny, Sandra Samuels, found him lying next to the dead bodies, picked him up, and ran to save him. There was also Karambir Singh Kang, the general manager of the Taj Hotel. His family was on the 6th floor of the hotel, and he had no idea whether they would survive the attacks. He relentlessly helped anyone and everyone he could without knowing what was happening to his family. Sadly, he lost them in these horrific attacks. We must also remember the nurse, Anjali Kulte of Kama Hospital, who saved the lives of at least 20 pregnant women when she discovered that the terrorists had entered the hospital. She locked the doors, she shut off the lights, took them to a pantry and hid them in nooks and corners so that the terrorists could not find them. And we must also remember Vishnu Jhengre. He was announcer on the Chhatrapati Shivaji station. He was shot by the terrorists, but he still kept announcing, asking passengers and commuters to take the rear exit and not come towards the main gate where the terrorists holding AK-47 and grenades were standing. All of these are the heroes, and there's so many more heroes like these of 26/11, and we must pay our tribute to them. So it's important today to remember not just those who were martyred, but also those who survived. We must not forget their sacrifices, and we must also learn our lessons and ensure that another 26/11 never, ever happens. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Ruhi, for that poignant and direct and extremely vivid description of the late evening hours and what ensued in your metropolis. Someone else from that city, of course, who also vividly recalls is Danish Khan. And over now to you, Danish.
Nehru Center and the Indian High Commission has come together to arrange this event. I'm very grateful to them. I mean, I remember that night very well for the simple reason that I got an alert on my mobile phone at that time saying that two groups of people had started a gunfight, perhaps a party that went wild. And I know we have to go to the Taj. And I, with my colleague Raju Shinde, a photographer at Mumbai Mirror, we both rushed down the Times of India building where we were working. And it was then that suddenly Raju heard, and I was there as well, we both heard some explosions or gunshots coming out from the CST station, which is right opposite our office. And then we took a decision that I will move ahead to Taj and Raju will go and check what's happening at the CST station. And that was the plan, and we didn't know what was in store. When I went ahead to Taj, Raju crossed over to the station. At the Taj, I could hear loud gunshots, and in fact I actually reached the main entrance, and it was things were still unfolding, and I was prevented from entering by actually the current Mumbai Police Commissioner Hemant Nagrale, who literally pushed me away. He was not with the Mumbai Police at that time actually, but his official residence was very close to the Taj in the same area, and he had just come out there to see what was unfolding. And when he literally pushed me, that's when I realized that there is something far sinister, something far more serious than we could even imagine. And very soon the area was cordoned off, and a grenade exploded at the same spot where I was 15 minutes earlier. And that's when I realized the gravity of the situation. It was scary. Rumors were flying thick and fast. And though there was no WhatsApp, and the social media was not as big as it is now, SMSs, all kinds of SMSs were doing the rounds. But when it emerged that terrorists had also occupied the Oberoi Trident, and the Nariman House and the Leopold Cafe, and the horror of what was going on at CST, that's when the bigger picture emerged. The horrific, horrendous, and unprecedented attack shook not just India, but the entire world. It was, in my opinion, the largest terror attack after 9/11, and it was an attack on everything that Mumbai as a city stood for. The CST, which has been a principal gateway to the commercial and financial capital of India, the Taj, which is an iconic symbol of India's hospitality and entrepreneurship, the small but cozy Leopold Cafe, an absolute favorite with the foreign tourists who come to South Mumbai, and also, of course, the Nariman House, which was specifically targeted because it housed a Jewish center. I mean, 26/11 was and will remain a very dark chapter, as unlike blasts, which the city unfortunately had seen earlier as well, this time we had people who made Mumbai look like an outpost of the border area. And I must say that I'm absolutely proud of the fact that my senior colleague Sebastian D'Souza, the photo editor of Mumbai Mirror, remember the TOI building is right opposite CST, so everyone just rushed down, and Sebi, captured the image of Kasab that ultimately helped in his conviction. He didn't think about his life. He moved between compartments of a stationary train in order to capture Kasab. I mean, if you look at those photos, it seems that he's posing for Sabi, but actually it was a very courageous act of Sebastian D'Souza, a fact that was also mentioned by the courts right up to the Supreme Court, who praised Sabi's role in capturing. There are several hero stories, some of which Ruhi said, and I'm sure Divya will speak as well, and so many human interest stories. But the trauma that it inflicted, not just the physical trauma, but the mental trauma for months and years, and it still remains. People live with it. Police officers who were injured, they still have scars, on their bodies and on their minds as well. It was a huge, unprecedented attack, which was not visualized, which was not thought of. And the city police did whatever they could, given the constraints we had. But also, I mean, of course, it came out that the Mumbai terror attack was executed by the Lashkar-e-Taiba, absolute footprint, a terror group which was based in Pakistan, and has been bleeding Kashmir as well. The attack was well planned in advance, and a Pakistani American, David Headley, was employed to scout out the information. He visited India multiple times, laid the ground for the attacks, fed all the information, and it was, of course, conceptualized and worked out by serving and retired officials of the Pakistan's ISI. And sadly, not much has changed. The masterminds are still free. These 10 militants carried out the Mumbai terror attack, and each of them was given rigorous training. They entered Mumbai using a stolen boat, traveling all the way from Karachi. They had satellite phones, GPS, and sophisticated weapons which they used. And after reaching the territorial waters, they divided themselves into 5 groups and captured the high profile hotels. And also they sent out an email saying that the Deccan Mujahideen group is responsible for these attacks, referencing the fact that it was a group which had its origins in India's Hyderabad, and it's ironical that the city police force was actually led by Hassan Ghafoor, who was from Hyderabad and who led the city, the Mumbai police in capturing these people. So absolute wonderful work in capturing that one person, Kasab, alive, which helped us showcase the extent of the terror and the terror infrastructure that went in the making of the terror attack.
Thank you very much, Danish, for that. Before I proceed to the other speakers, could I but bring myself to note this, that on 29th August 2012, Ajmal Kasab was hanged to death after having been found guilty. And that's what happens in a representative, accountable, working democracy as India. And it is to be noted that the case and proceedings against him were formally entitled as Ajmal Kasab versus the Union of India. It was waging war against the Union of India. You rightly pointed out Mumbai as India's metropolis and nerve center, which was targeted and rent the city apart. But it was in more ways than one an entire attack on the Indian Union, and a full fledged accountable trial occurred, and he was represented. Legal due process and other formalities were in consonance and in place, and pursuant to which only he was found guilty and in 2010 and then subsequently hung in 2012. That is something to note as such. And I feel it must be driven home that India did everything with due diligence. Over to Divya Salaskar now. Divya, please.
Good afternoon to those in the UK, and a very good evening to those joining in here from India. My name is Divya Vijay Salaskar, and I'm the daughter of Police Inspector Vijay Salaskar. My father was the chief of anti-extortion cell in Mumbai. He attained martyrdom in the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks. As a victim of violence, I can relate to every person who lost someone they loved dearly. 172 people lost their lives, or so says the government report. But I don't believe 172 people lost their lives. I believe 172 families were uprooted that night. It left a hole in the lives of those 172 families, which no amount of time can fill. Sure, I'm very proud of my father as an Indian. He fought fiercely in a warlike situation for which he was conferred the Ashok Chakra, and he saved many lives. But as a daughter, I miss him. The emotional void is too big to fill. I like being a strong father, strong daughter. I get my strength from him. Yet there are these moments where life seems absolutely unbearable. My father was my best friend, my mentor. He was, for 21 years of my life, he was there with me. And then one fine night, just somebody walks into my country, my city. My father loses his life saving the city. And I have this void to live with. But what I have learned from my father has always been that there will be situations, but we have to learn from these situations. As as Ruhi said, or as Danish said, that they very well explained the events of the night. So I'm not going to reiterate those. I would rather like to talk about the lessons that Mumbai took from this terrorist attacks. I think one of the key things that really happened was uh, the Mumbai attacks actually evoked a national and international outcry against terrorism. And the world started taking terrorism very seriously. I mean, 9/11 and then 26/11. And the world started noticing that, oh my God, this is actually a really huge problem. And if we as a world don't fight it, we are not going to be anywhere. And it's better that, we nip it in the bud before this plague of terrorism takes over the world. On 17th December 2008, the Indian Parliament consented to the creation of NIA, National Investigation Agency, a federal counter-terrorism group having functions similar to many as those of the FBI. As those of the FBI. I think the attacks, since international citizens that like rightly pointed out in the video, there were citizens from the UK, from the US, from Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Mauritius, Japan, etc. It was not just an attack on one city, it was an attack on the world. They wanted to prove a point. Lashkar-e-Taiba was very determined that, okay, this is what we are here to do, but we as people need to throw them off. We as world need to come together. I think that is the most important lesson. One good thing was that India did have a good amount of support from the international community. For example, the US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice at that point and British Prime Minister Gordon Brown toured both India and Pakistan following the attacks. India made a plea to the United Security Council for sanctions against Jamaat-ud-Dawa, contending that the group was the forefront of Lashkar-e-Taiba. Unfortunately, not many actions have been taken to curb the group or to take action against Jamaat-ud-Dawa. But I urge, and I'm very grateful to the Nehru Center as well as the Indian High Commission in the UK for giving me this platform to voice that we need to take some very serious steps, so that we need to curb terrorism in the bud. What happened was horrifying. Was there are times when I could not get up, and there were times when I could still I was blank for days, and I went through a lot of psychological trauma post the attacks. But what I do realize is that there are some very key lessons we need to take, and we need to nip terrorism in the bud. Otherwise, there'll be many Divya Salaskars, and I really would not wish that upon anyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Divya, for that. Lady Verma, could we have your observations now, please, from England?
Thank you so very much. And I also join everybody in thanking the Nehru Centre and the Indian High Commission in UK for allowing us this opportunity to speak about something that traumatized the world for a long time post 9/11 in America. And, listening to Ruhi and to Danish and to Divya, three young people who lived through that period, through their own experiences. And we were sitting in the UK watching things unfold. The horror of somebody who was born in India and takes it very personal when anything impacts on the country of her birth. It was desperate to see innocent people being mowed down. But what I've come from just listening to these brilliant three previous speeches from my other colleagues on the panel is that, we praise the heroes, but we praise those people who actually went out as ordinary citizens and put themselves in front of danger to save others. And, there's no amount of congratulations that we can give to that spirit, but that spirit is innate in most people, that they don't see themselves in danger by putting others forward. And Divya said something very poignant. She said it was a plague of terrorism, and the plague of terrorism still engulfs us all. And the problem we have is that we are still learning lessons from whether it's 9/11 or this 26/11 in India. And, when I was listening to Ruhi and to Danish, I was thinking, at the forefront of reporting were journalists like you, having to record what was unfolding for the rest of the world to be able to see the absolute horrors that were taking place and the innocent lives that were being lost, but also the innocent lives that suddenly just in a minute were impacted forever. And to Divya's point, it wasn't just those that died that night or those that were injured that night, but the families around those families, those people that were lost and injured. But the wider debate I think we need to have today is, why is it that we still have a complete denial of being able to ensure that those held responsible aren't totally accountable? Yes, those people who led those 10 terrorists and they are just terrorists, murderers that came onto the shores of India from Pakistan. They were met, 9 of them were killed, and the 10th was tried by a court and due process and hanged. But we have got to get the accountability for where these people breed this hate, this terrorism, and are housed and homed, so that they cannot continue to be financed, to be able to access support and prey on innocent lives wherever they tread. India has been a turning point for many. When the Mumbai attacks happened, it made us all sit back and really rethink on how we globally needed to address the curse of people being able to come across with the support of people within their own countries to be able to finance them and to give them the means, the ammunition, the tools, the intelligence to be able to come through. But it also demonstrated to us how we cannot sit by and allow this to ever happen again. There are attacks going on every single day in some part of the world. We see them, and we have got to see that this is a plague, this is a purge on all of us if we don't tackle it globally. And therefore, when we come together as a world global community, how do we get the intelligence to work for us? I knew somebody who was in the hotel on the day that it was attacked. And, he was very strident. Sadly, he is no longer with us. But he was very strident in his thought that there would be no excuse, no reason given for why anybody should get away with these heinous attacks. So for me, this debate is critical. It is not the debate has ended or stopped. It should be a debate that really pushes us to force countries around us to be able to act to ensure that no country is a harbor, a home for terrorism, for terrorists, and for funding to fund terrorism.
Thank you very much, Lady Verma, for your observations. And as you put it, we need to dovetail onto what is happening and where it emanates from. And without equivocation, one can say that Pakistan is the mothership of terrorism. We saw it with 7/7 and the bombers here and the Birmingham, among other attacks, who have been back and forth to Pakistan. And governments of both Labour and Conservative administrations have repeatedly, privately, and that is the thing, privately pointed out to Pakistan, but precious little has come of it. Following November 2008, Prime Minister Cameron, in July 2010, on a visit to India, in Bangalore, was the first Western leader to declare, quote, Pakistan is looking both ways, close quote. That is, running with the hare and hunting with the hounds, and this double-dealing game with multiple partners, which goes back to the war on terror, which started after September 11th. Kudos to Prime Minister Cameron on that particular count, because no Western leader until then, and all were in the know of it, but would actually state so. But Cameron did, and he did that much to the ire of British Pakistani Labour MPs and the populace here at large. But of course, he was vindicated 10 months later, May 2011, at the Abbottabad countdown when Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan. And yet, Pakistan got away then too, as it has now with the Taliban back in power. And it is ominous as to we see what unfolds even in the future as we stumble into it. And that Pakistan has time and again actually ridden out these so-called crises by painting a picture otherwise to the world. And administrations, all Western administrations, London, Washington, Paris, Berlin, among others, feel helpless in tackling them because they need some leverage with the Pakistani deep state in order to not have attacks on their own soil. But the question is, how long does this trade-off continue? With that thought, I would like to open up to all our discussants to come in and offer us additional observations and perspectives. Please, over to all of you. Please feel free to come in, Ruhi, Danish, one by one, or among ourselves. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm happy to start, and I do want to thank Divya for for bringing your feelings out to us and telling us how difficult that was. We can only imagine something as devastating as that, being a family member, losing someone so close to you. And as a journalist, I want to talk about this issue. This one way I think we can pay our respects to the victims of 26/11 terror attacks is to ensure that we center them in our reporting, not years later in commemoration news report, but in ground reporting of terror attacks. I was a journalist trained in London, and I was trained in conflict reporting, something many of my colleagues in India were not. Over the last few years, as a media scholar at the London School of Economics, I have had the opportunity to probe deeper into some of the finer aspects of journalism. And so I can tell you that I really very strongly believe that the most important thing for journalists reporting on terror attacks is to be empathetic. Report in a way that is informative, but also respectful to the victims of the terror attacks. Because good journalism, at the end of it, needs to protect the victims, their security, their privacy, and most importantly, their dignity. And we see this today. We see that the media is consumed by breaking news. It's all about reporting first. Instead, we should start thinking about reporting right. And that is what it should be all about, especially while covering acts of terrorism. It is important to reflect rather than rush. Reflect, especially on the fundamental norms and values of journalism, and make sure that we center them in all our reportage. Of course, I know 26/11 came as a huge shock, and it was followed by complete chaos. Every single person was perhaps glued to the television to find out what was going on, to make sure that they were safe, their loved ones were safe, whether there were still threats that were continuing, and more specifically, when will all of this end? Of course, it becomes imperative for journalists to get the correct information out to the public, especially when there's so much uncertainty and the city is under attack. It is the right of the people and the duty of every journalist, and vital for informed decision making. But this should definitely not be at the expense of the victims, especially like showing images of people trapped inside hotels, or of NSG commandos coming into battle, or highlighting the next moves of the investigating officers, or even fanning rumors, or naming casualties before the family are informed. Too often, family members hear about losing loved ones on TV, or when a reporter calls for a quote, or a camera is thrust in their face for a comment. This is absolutely wild. International standards, if you follow them, you know that we have to protect the privacy and the respect of the family during terror attacks, and they should take precedence over whatever we need to report in the media. And approaching someone in shock and grief is ethically wrong on so many fronts. And we need to think very, very carefully about not turning victims into spectacles. Of course, I know there's intense pressure on the media to convey the scene, to bring the event out to the public as accurately and with as vividness as possible, to relay the emotions, the reactions of the public. But there is this really fine line that journalists have to balance between public demands and ethical considerations. It's not an easy job, but it's a very, very important one. And I believe focus on security, privacy, and dignity of the victims should take precedence. And before I end, I also want to say that's really important to remember that it's very easy to blame the media, but everyone depends on journalists to risk their lives to bring in news. They are very, very much a part of the ecosystem of essential workers in a terror attack. So that's all I wanted to bring in. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that salutary observation, Divya. And so if we are going to blame someone, and quite rightly, it is Pakistan, and I should take this opportunity on live on air to state so that General Shuja Pasha, Director General of the Inter-Services Intelligence, Pakistan's intelligence wing, did 3 days later after the attack, privately convene with the British and American and one European ambassador in Islamabad to make a clean breast and say Yes, it was conducted and conceived by some of my boys, that is within the ISI, or at least part of it. And yet, publicly, Pakistan has vehemently denied it. And Lady Verma, on Boxing Day 2008, 2 months later, Pasha flew into Washington, well, to Langley, Virginia, to see General Michael Hayden, his CIA counterpart, where, of course, he flatly denied it. So this on again, off again attitude with Pakistan is exasperating, to say the least. But he did declare this, and I know this on good account from Professor Aisha Siddiqa, of SOAS South Asia Institute Research Associate Fellow, who said she was informed by one ambassador in Islamabad that Shuja Pasha made a clean breast of it to them privately. But of course, publicly, Pakistan plays a different tune. Sorry, could I bring in Danish and Divya now, and Lady Verma, you subsequently too?
I mean, yes, absolutely. So the 2008 attacks were, a lot of things to lot many people, but I think it was also an opportunity for Pakistan to put its house in order. Even if we discount the fact that it was a section of the deep state, it did offer a template for correction. It did offer a template for them to reflect, which didn't happen. And yes, so first there was denial that it's not us, it's nothing to do, but things unraveled, and it could be traced. And as I said, because Kasab was caught alive, he confessed, and things matched up. In fact, the Pakistani media themselves did stories about how Kasab was from this particular area, this particular village, and all of those things unraveled. So the course correction, it was a good opportunity, I will say. I mean, I will put it in that way, that attack of the magnitude of 2611 that shook the entire region, the entire world, could have been also an opportunity for course correction, which didn't happen. But it was very important to realize that it was then David Headley's confession that came out, and which made everything out in black and white. I mean, David Headley visited India on several occasions. Now, of course, there are books and a lot of articles that have come out specifically on the career of David Headley, which put everything in the open. But it also offered an opportunity to India, to Mumbai and the Mumbai police, to what could be done and how they could, be better prepared. Because as I said, it was unprecedented. Nobody had ever thought that something like this could take place. I mean, and I've reported on the Mumbai police and the crime scene. Our police force did whatever they could to the best. The guns that we had, the infrastructure that we had, it just couldn't match, the backing of an entire, state and a terror organization. And it was so sudden, and it was so well planned. But it also brought out the best of in the people. I mean, there were so many human interest stories that I covered. I remember, I mean, oh gosh, people feeding the NSG commandos, or offering tea, offering water, and then communities coming together to kind of help tide over the collective pain that was inflicted on the city. For so many weeks and days, people were afraid of taking the trains, for example. And I'm trying to specifically figure out the mental trauma that goes, which in India is still not that much discussed, and it affected people so badly. I mean, I remember, Buzine, that I took the road where Salaskar, Karkare, and Kamte Saab were killed, and there was a board, an electric board, which bore those bullet marks, and it remained there for, I think, for quite a long time. And every time I will pass that, I will see that electric board, and it was riddled with bullets, and it was very revolting. So I hope that it also helped in bringing out a change in the way we thought as a society, in the way the police organization and the central agencies could think. It did bring about a cultural change, and I only hope that we are better equipped to face any such future attack, and also perhaps do whatever we can by putting pressure, using the international community to ensure that something like this doesn't happen. And if it happens, the people who are behind it are held accountable for that, because we know what's happening in Pakistan, the shambolic trial where the Lashkar chief was put on, and then he's coming in house arrest, and I don't want to go into those stories, but it's absolutely important that we use our diplomatic efforts to ensure that the people who are responsible for such gruesome attacks are booked.
Thank you, Danish. Divya and Lady Verma, please go ahead, and then we'll open up to the audience globally. Please, either one of you.
Madam, would you like to go ahead?
Divya, I'll follow you.
Okay. I completely agree. To begin with, I'm going to keep this very short. I completely agree with Madam Baroness Verma that we need to nip it in the bud. We need to the countries that finance, support, and these kind of activities. These countries themselves need to be stopped. The means, the ammunition, tools, intelligence. All this needs to be stopped at the very base. And like she rightly pointed out, we cannot sit by and watch. It's a war on all of us. And why should any country be a home for terrorists, and why should they harbor these kind of ideologies? Okay, as also Ruhi mentioned, that yes, I had a very conflicting thought about journalism, and I was 21 when these attacks happened. I remember that when on 27th, when they got my father home, and I went, I was there with him, and all the cameras went click, 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 and then somebody asked me, "How do you feel?" How am I supposed to feel? It was such a lame question. But over the years, I have realized that ethical journalism also exists, and it is because of ethical journalism, as we pointed out, that we are a part of the ecosystem, that I think that somewhere journalism is also been very important in keeping 26/11 alive. That we should not forget what happened, and because the human memory is very fragile, and we tend to forget and we tend to move on. But it is always the journalists that say that no, do not forget what happened, and let's fight back. I'd like to agree with Danish as well that Pakistan was given a chance for correction. I don't know if they tried correcting, or even the Peshawar attack that happened in Pakistan where small children were killed. I don't know, like you said that there were Pakistan played a very dual role where they were the hunters, but they were acting like they were being hunted. And as Madam Hillary Clinton once rightly said, that if you keep snakes in your own backyard, you can't always expect them to bite the neighbors.
And not bite you. Quite rightly, Divya,
Yeah.
as she put it.
So that's it. I'm done with my comments. I pass over to Madam Baroness Verma.
Thank you very much, Divya. And just following on from what you were saying, part of the issues that we all have is, yes, I fully take on board what Ruhi was saying about journalism has to be empathetic and has to be truthful. But I also think they are the protectors of images that are going on at that time, so that we can actually, the world can see what's unfolding, but it has to be done whereby we get a truthful picture of what is happening. But I want to go back to something, I think it was mentioned earlier about Michael Hayden, the ex-CIA chief. And, he argues in his book, and his book is quite an interesting read, that, the Pakistani army is built to fight against India. Now, that is a big statement. And if we take that statement in its round, then it means that there is no place for correction, because they have it innately built in that they do not want to correct. Because if it is an observation by somebody who's seen it at very close quarters, that there is this building of a particular organization solely for the purposes of destroying something else, which is India, then where can the correction come? I mean, however hard we try to look at this, I've observed what's gone on between that region for a very, very long time. It's a personal interest because I'm from India, but I also want us to sort of explore, why is it that whereas there might be a little bit of a noise somewhere in India, the huge fact is that, you know, the minority communities in Pakistan have shrunk totally from 23% to a tiny 3% now. Why aren't we questioning why that's happening? Why aren't we questioning why is it that people feel that they are persecuted and forced into doing things against their will? Why is it that we cannot have an honest, open debate about this issue on terrorism, knowing that, you know, we know it houses terrorist groups, and yet it falls mostly silent in open public global debate? How are we going to get that charged up? Because unless we tackle it as a narrative, as a discussion, as a dialogue, you know, these we can skirt around the issues for a very, very long time, knowing where the problem lies. But we need to be able to call out. And I've just read a comment, you know, where the arsonist then tries to be the firefighter. Well, actually, you know, it's really, really important that when we're looking at a reflection in history, a reflection isn't just about looking at, you know, the incident of the time, but what's led up to it, but what's following it after. And the following after is, for me, critical in calling out. And, you know, I was really very, very proud that David Cameron did call it out. I wish the world had been a little bit more braver to call it out with him, because maybe that correction may have started then. But, you know, we have got a long, long way to go. And, you know, I sat in as somebody who knows how it is to sit and wait for a situation to resolve when terrorists are attacking a democracy. You know, it is very, very difficult. We've seen it in London many times over. And, you know, we have to see this as a global solution to a global problem, because unless we tackle it like that, it's not going to go away.
Lady Verma, thank you very much. And just before we open up to the audience very quickly, I fear in the current climate and the way the British Labour Party is going, I see precious little headway in terms of having a debate. What with British Pakistani MPs who don't have the moral courage, never mind talking or critiquing in what happened in India, but about their own Pakistani citizens, what happens to Pakistani Ahmadiyas, Pakistani Christians, Pakistani Sikhs, and Pakistani Hindus. Not once have they had a debate or a pipsqueak about it, because they are enthralled to Islamabad and are counted as a vote bank and a lobby on that. Not once have they had the moral decency to speak about what happens on their ancestral home front as such. Never mind India and what happened on 26/11. I should like to now open up for observations, comments, and questions from the audience globally to our discussants. Over to others. Mr. Jory, would you please take over? Thank you. Yes, we have Mr. Shafi, who asks, what is the British government doing to hold Pakistan accountable for harboring terrorist outfits like the LAT and the JUD? A question to Lady Verma.
Thank you very much. I did see that question come up. And as you know, these holding accountability cannot be done just, as I said before, David Cameron stood up, spoke up. But if you are going to get a solution or as I think Danish said, a correction, then it has to be done globally. I mean, you know, the UN has to take a stand on this. There has to be a platform where you can call people out and not allow them to rant off and talk about everything else but the issue at large. So I think we have to look at the United Nations platform, see how we can make sure that countries come together to utilize it as a force for good, rather than expect individual countries to be able to find solutions. Every single country on the planet has got to be taking ownership of their responsibility to fight terrorism wherever it is, and for us to be able to call them out. But that has to be done through a very strong, firm UN.
Lady Verma, globally speaking, what with the financial task force and Pakistan lingers and survives in the grey area, and needs to be put on the blacklist. I hope you reverberate this through Whitehall and London takes a stance that Pakistan needs to go in the blacklist now more than ever, now with the Taliban in power, and that they are supporting a retrograde reactionary regime and what is happening in Afghanistan in front of us, that Pakistan has been subventing this, and that London needs to take a stance despite domestic political considerations of local electorates, that Pakistan needs to go in the blacklist of the Financial Task Force. Nothing could be more globally if we work, say, at that as one particular portal. Yes, please. Other comments, observations, and questions? Mr. Sahu asks, they are forcing the Hindu community to pay for the temples they attack and broke for repair. Well, that has been occurring in Pakistan, including, as I just pointed out, the rape and abduction and forcible conversions of Sikhs, Hindus, Christians, and Ahmadiyas. And again, precious little has been brought up, except for the US State Department religious freedom reports, which are non-binding in a sense. They just report. And of course, Pakistan can dismiss them disdainfully. Mr. Banerjee says that Pakistani sleepers are up to developing internal civil unrests. Well, that is a restatement of the obvious, because the ISI deep state is more than happy to pit Pakistanis against Pakistanis, and that is how the military still calls the shots. And we have what is an episodic and not continuous democracy in Pakistan. Any comments from the discussants? Please go ahead. Here we have a comment from Mr. Aucha saying that we have had a good run of a session, and a very critical point was raised by Ruhi on the moral implications that is incumbent upon journalists. I'm glad Mr. Aucha pointed that out too.
I mean, and also I will just like to add a bit that we have to have this culture of remembrance. You know, we have the Remembrance Day, for example, here, right? And I think that's where we lack as India, as South Asians. We need to have that culture of remembering our heroes and remembering events and remembering what has happened, so that it is ingrained in our psyche and that we continue to learn lessons. Debates and events like this are good, but also something on ground. I know that we do commemorate, but it's not of the same intensity, of the same passion, because we also tend to get very much into the everyday life. So this general apathy has to also take a back seat, so that the collective conscience of the people is always there. When these events come, we do realize the enormity of it and what we faced. And I think that's also a very important takeaway that I get, especially when we observe the things as they happen here in the UK, where everything is remembered, things are commemorated. Every other day you have a blue plaque coming up. We need something like that as well to take place in India.
I agree with Danish. I agree with Danish here. Yes, in India, we really need to have something like a Remembrance Day, because unfortunately, we have a lot to pay as homage on Remembrance Day. Mm-hmm. And yes, I think it is very important, because we are a culturally diverse country. So I think this is what would bind us even more together. So I do completely agree that we need to have a Remembrance Day. Definitely.
Can I just add to that just one thing, that there were so many other nationalities that also died. And I think for us as a collective memory, what you've just said, Danish, as a collective memory, those people have also got, I'm pretty certain would want to know there is a place for them to come to be able to remind themselves, remember their loved ones that they lost, and to be able to come back to the community where their lost ones lost their lives, but knew that they loved being there. So there is a relationship that has been bonded forever. And I firmly believe commemorating and bringing people together does exactly what you said, Divya. It helps people heal.
Yes. Okay.
And I would also like to take this one step forward and say, instead of just commemorating, which is a grand gesture and which is something we should definitely do, we should also take this up to learn our lessons. So this should be something that is used as a case study in journalism schools on how to report on events like this. This should be something that the police, and I hope they are doing this, use for training purposes. How do constables with batons fight terrorists with AK-47? I mean, people didn't know what to do. It's not like they didn't want to fight or they couldn't fight and that's why they lost their lives. They were not equipped. They were not trained for these moments. So there are lots of lessons that we can take from this moment, and it has to be something that is reflected on an ongoing basis so that we learn, we develop, and we ensure such incidents don't happen again.
Well, Mr. Roy asks, why was the referendum not blocked by the UK government given the involvement of the ISI? I'm not quite sure which referendum he had in mind. Mr. Roy, I don't quite catch what the observation is, if you could qualify that. Lady Verma, you mentioned about inclusivity and the world at large because it was an international attack. I would be remiss in not pointing out that Bombay's Muslim community and Indian Muslims at large, but Bombay particularly, Mumbai's Muslims, refused burial to all 9 of the terrorists. Yeah. So much for Pakistan and so much for claiming to be a moral voice for so-called India's beleaguered Muslims. I mean, India's Muslims were having none of it. None of what Pakistan tends to portray about India or Indian Muslims, or Bombay's Muslims for that matter. And despite the government urging the Bombay Muslim community, well, the Muslim community went against the government in officialdom and said, nothing doing, we hold no truck with these individuals, and you are not going to bury them in any of our cities' cemeteries. I feel it is absolutely imperative that that is placed squarely on record here. It would be remiss not to do so. I think we've just crossed the hour, and it only remains for me to thank each and every one of you as discussants, and also Mr. Jory, our technician, who has seamlessly taken us through this hour, and the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, under which Aegis the Nehru Center operates as a hospitable forum for this webinar today, and the High Commission of India at large. Thank you very much and all the very best. And thank you to our audience worldwide who joined us on social media portals for this live webinar session. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you to you too.